Well, so as Chris said, I'll talk about, as the topic says, gap to zero. And the concept here really is how do you go from an idea to a part in your hand, and how do we reduce this gap? And we heard a lot of good stories this morning. A lot of people talk about manufacturing, the factory floor and everything. And my goal today is to take you a little bit away from the factory floor and talk about some other things happening which are creating this gap to zero environment, if you will. Now, before I start, let me just tell you a quick, fun fact about myself. I grew up in a very small town in northern part of India in the foothills of Himalayas, a town called Dehradun. Did my undergrad in Bombay. Well, we call it Mumbai now, but we used to call it Bombay then. Then I moved to Los Angeles, spent a number of years there. In the early part of my school, my master's and my early part of my career. From Los Angeles, moved to Paris for 5 years or so, and then I'm in Boston for the last 4 years. So just a little fun fact about myself. Now, you might have heard a lot about Industry 4.0. I think you must be hiding under a rock or something if you don't hear about Industry 4.0. Everybody talks about Industry 4.0, and it's amazing stuff is happening, right? So it's changing because of the technology accessibility, the exponential technologies we talk about, and everything else. So we talk about, we are in this fourth industrial revolution. As I said, no matter, I travel quite a bit as part of my job, and no matter which part of the world you go in, I was in Mexico City a couple of weeks ago, they talk about Industrial 4.0. You go to Shenzhen, you go to China, they'll talk about Industry 4.0, go to Germany, whatever. So everybody is talking about it, and this is an article from Deloitte, but it's talking about, what's making this change happen, the fourth industrial revolution, as we call it, including technologies, and in pretty much every industry. But again, my parent company is French, so we don't talk about revolutions, we talk about Renaissance. And my goal is to really talk a little bit about Renaissance in the context of other than the manufacturing floor, what's happening, right? So industrial revolution and smart factories and all that, but what's happening is a lot of times the Renaissance is about people, the human factor, but it's also about art and design. And we already saw this morning a fascinating presentation where we talked about a subject we don't want to talk about generally, but we talk about the contribution of design and art in that. That's what I want to talk about, and it's really this intersection. The Renaissance is about the intersection of the art, technology, and business. So I hope that in my coming slides with examples, I can impart upon you what I have learned over the last few years. So let's start with the intersection of art, business, and technology. And I want to use a very interesting example from a very small company called Mira. They grew out of USC, which is my alma mater, go Trojans. And I'll talk about it. USC is out of Los Angeles. So let's take a quick look at this video of Mira at TechCrunch. So what is special about Mira? I visited these guys, I think I forget, a couple of months ago. I was in Los Angeles, and I went to see them. And it's partly because I was at USC, which is, as I said, alma mater. But very interesting thing about USC is they recently, I'd say recently, but a year ago, they launched a new school. It's called the School of, Wine and Young School of Design. Or it's more about entrepreneurship. And it was funded by Dr. Dre, the Beats guy, and Wine, which is a big music producer, one of the top ones in Hollywood. And their whole idea was that innovation doesn't happen just with technology, but it happens with inspiration, And Compton is, if you've been in LA, I lived there in downtown LA as part of my school for between 4 to 5 years, and Compton is nearby. And their goal was in the neighborhood, how do we motivate people to come in and contribute in innovation? So that's a school setup. These 4 gentlemen you see were the first graduates. There were 28 graduates out of that school, which is about this intersection of art, science, and business. So you have Ben, you have Matt, Montana, and Evan. And they're from different disciplines. They're all coming together. They started their company when they were in, I think, the 2nd year of their program. And actually, their 4th year was just working on the company. So the idea that it's not traditionally how you would start a company, right? But the schools now, and it's happening in Cornell Tech. There's so many schools out there which are promoting this kind of things where they're bringing different disciplines together. So just switching the gear a little bit, I know I mentioned earlier about Industrial Revolution. I talked about Renaissance. I think we'll remiss if we won't talk about few, I'd say, exponential technologies we are looking at. I want to talk about maybe a couple of them. I know everybody talks about 3D printing. I'm going to talk about that very quickly. I want to use, first I want to talk about virtual reality, and I want to use this example, which is the Canada-France telescope in Hawaii. This is for looking into the deep space, established in 1979. It's a pretty huge structure. The telescope is that top part of it. And what these guys want to do is to transform the 3.6 meter dome into a 10 meter high dome, right? So you can imagine it's like all the machinery and everything which goes into it. So they haven't, they have the existing one and they want to renovate it. So they are using technologies such as augmented reality and so on to give people experience without making anything to make this happen. And just keep one thing in mind as you're watching this video, which will come up, that augmented reality is there, right? The first example you saw, which was the Mira guys, they had a very, proposition was a $99 over-the-glass AR, VR scenario for things such as reading stuff on a factory floor, in a classroom environment, and so on and so forth. This thing is crazy. Think about where the technology has come. It's not just a small CAD part you're looking at. You're looking at hundreds of thousands of parts all in real time, and you're walking through that without ever making anything. So we're just there. We're just there on augmented reality when it comes to these large things. The other part of in the video, which will be coming up, is also, this is more of an experience directly inside a CAD environment, if you will. But then also there is experiences which you build, outside of it. And there's this whole concept of GLTF. This is the idea that now you can take CAD files out, make them VR ready, and put it in such that you can have a lab experience. So the previous part in the video was at University of Texas, where they're using augmented reality and CAD to actually do lab classes. So now they can have a very sophisticated lab without having one. So they can provide access to many more people. Exponential technologies. Everything we see, we talk about smart products or IoT products. Well, integrated mechatronics is there. It's been done. But what I am excited about is the idea of plastronics. Maybe it's a word, maybe it's not. But the idea that you can do electronics and plastics combined together in one shot. Because if you're able to do that, where you can print electronics, guess what? The boards are gone. You don't have to do assemblies of parts and all that. You don't have to account for gaps in your product. And you'll be able to do various things. So this is something, a company out of Israel, Nano Dimensions, which is doing a lot of stuff around 3D printing electronics directly. And this is a reality. So everything I'm showing you here, it's in practice. It's not a vision, but they're doing. They do designs in here, directly inside CAD again, and directly 3D print them. This is amazing technology, guys. And this is happening. And here's a little video of a company called Aldebaran, which was bought by SoftBank. And I'll connect the plastronics part in a second here.
Hello, SolidWorks. I'm glad to finally meet you.
So this was my visit a few years ago when I visited Aldebaran. And they are, of course, using SolidWorks to design a lot of these robots. But the goal, the chief engineer there said, well, look, really, you see this robot, our electronics are still bored, and it's very complex. And we need to fit a lot of stuff inside this robot, but we are limited by today's technology. And he is the one who said plastronics is where we want to go. Because if we can 3D print into this arm, because a lot of wiring and all those things are there in a robot, we can make these smaller and much more technology can be put in there. So I'll be glad to go back to the guy and say, well, that's happening now with the idea of 3D printed electronics. Another topic, I want to bring back the human factor a little bit, because technology and this gap to zero idea of going from an idea to a part is not just about technology, but access to technology. In education, we always talk about, I go to a lot of schools, et cetera. Education, we talk about, well, look, education is there, but how do you lower the barrier so everybody can get to education? Same way, in manufacturing and making things, how do you provide access to everybody? So this whole democratization, starting with the fab labs and the maker spaces, is a big movement. And I think no matter where you go, you'll start to see that. Here's a quick take from just right off the street. Dr. Neil Gershenfeld, who started
if you could make almost anything.
This is Sherry Lasseter of Fab Foundation.
A dignity in making things.
Fabrication is being digitized and becoming personal.
This is the craft of our century.
Fab labs are about digital fabrication, which means you can design something and then a robotic machine will make it, bring it into life.
It provides the means to create what you consume. It includes a 3D printer, a precision machine that can make electronic circuits.
Fab labs are in, we believe, about 75 to 80 countries, doubling in size every, say, 12 to 18 months.
Probably the best single toy that mankind has ever invented.
Where can they now make a societal impact, just like it is done in Kenya, Rwanda, India, China, the floating fab lab down the Amazon that they're trying?
Putting a fab lab in a refugee camp provides creation and bootstrapping.
It fits in a shipping container. It's a pretty cheap and efficient way to build relatively robust housing for refugee scenarios.
So I'm going to skip that very quickly, but the idea here is that, look, there's a huge movement happening there, and the renaissance I talk about is happening on the streets, it's happening in villages, it's happening in cities, it's happening everywhere. This is a picture which I took last year before the earthquake in Mexico City, standing from what would be a fab lab in downtown Mexico City. It's a 10-story building, an empty building, an old-looking building, which some motivated people are turning into a fab lab. And by the way, the story is different now. It's already changed into something. But this is the view, and the whole idea is to change the 10 blocks around the city. This is, they have a restaurant incubator there. They want to change the way transportation happens within those 10 blocks. And this is not the nicest parts of downtown. And their goal is to turn that 10-block city, this is the vision, which you have incubators and startup happening. So this is really about social innovation as well, right? Providing access to all the artisans who are making furniture there. Bring them up, and now they can up their game, right? So this movement this is an example of Mexico City. This is all across the world. You probably see on the top is the Fab Lab in Rwanda, which I again had the good opportunity to participate in. And that's changing the economy of that whole country. I mean, if you know Rwanda, it has a pretty dark past, but a very bright future. And they're using technology as a way to change it. So that's changing the whole country. Small country of Bhutan, which measures not GDP, but gross happiness. They invested, we helped them with help of MIT, put a fab lab there. It's changing that small country. In fact, we just heard the news that they will be actually putting millions of dollars in putting fab lab in every little village there. So that's the goal of the king or the prime minister there. Let me see, there is That's Maker Faire in New York. This year, actually in January, we'll be working on a fab lab with help of MIT again in Chile at the southernmost tip of the world. So in places, the message here is in places where technology is not easily accessible. And if we can make those people go from this gap to zero, the idea of squeezing from a concept to producing part and solve real problems, right? And these are connected, by the way. It's not just a remote lab sitting somewhere in a corner, but these are all connected. So solve local problems with global help. This is a very good example, which I love because I, again, had the opportunity to visit. This is in a place called Pabal in Pune, a village where really they call it the Fab Lab Zero, right? Because this is where the inspiration, actually Dr. Neil Gershenfeld of MIT, CBA, got his inspiration to start the Fab movement in there. Because this lab was established even before the Fab Labs concept came, and their whole idea was entrepreneurship is by doing. So they take people, kids from villages, neighboring villages, and they teach. They have classes of 7 to 8 months of making everything. They do everything in that place. In fact, every engineer or anybody who has idea of making should go live there for 6 months. Is fascinating stuff. You do everything there. For example, this girl you see up on so she is holding an enable arm. And the way you graduate is you have to pick a customer from the local village, so you're solving real problems. So it's not some fictitious thing. You're going to solve a real problem, and if you can solve it and the customer is happy, you graduate, and you can then turn it into a business. So her project was, she took a person without an arm in the village, and she wanted to make sure that that person can do some basic stuff by providing that arm. And of course, that means taking the basic design, adding some changes, because that's sort of an open source design. And they do a lot of things like that. And they've done some very good inventions in solar and things like that in that part. Quickly, I will touch upon also the youth and the schools, what we can do. And I'm pretty passionate about it in here, which is the first, and I think a lot of you have probably heard about FIRST organization, FIRST Robotics, which is a fascinating thing. Another movement which is helping, I'd say, around manufacturing. This is my team. My team, as in I'm a mentor for one of these teams, Storm Gears 5422. There's close to 4,000 teams. And you see the kids are doing, which sometimes you and I, we think about, it'll take us maybe a few years to make. They have to make a robot with full vision systems, shooting stuff, manipulating autonomous round, learning programming, learning CAD, learning manufacturing, learning CNC, learning 3D printing, all of that in 6 weeks. Well, 6 weeks is when the competition is defined, the game is defined, and they have to make the robot. Of course, as mentors, we teach them how to train for it and things like that. And it starts, for example, now, and then the competition game will be announced in January. So this is our team. This is last year's, actually not last year, this is the year before that, where you're doing CAD. And just from so within 6 weeks now, this is a practice round, but imagine the robot is able to shoot. The idea is to get the ball. It's all vision system autonomously programmed. Now you have to do it in the field as well. So just imagine being able to build these things from nothing to working things in 6 weeks. So that's what the FIRST is able to do. High school kids are able to do it. They have similar things for even younger kids. This is a picture of this year in Detroit. So I was in Detroit with my team. We were lucky enough to make to the finals. 70,000 people, guys. Which tech event has seen 70,000 people? Now, I heard that the sales, Dreamforce had 120,000 people at their conference. They took over parts of San Francisco last week. But this is all passionate kids, and I have amazing videos from this. And when I get some chance, I'll be able to show you, but not today. But just to give you a picture of what happens there. So they had 5 different competitions going simultaneously, and teams from all across the world. So coming back to bringing it a little bit back home, so I talked about how all this social innovation and everything is leading up to it, but it also results into a lot of innovation. A lot of companies who could only do software startups, and we heard about all these different software startups coming up because it's very easy to make stuff on cloud and all of that. Hardware was hard. But now hardware is becoming easy as well with all the things I talked about earlier. So RB is a company in Pasadena. By the way, I wrote this. I think I can even pick this up here. Okay, I just put it here. So I didn't write it from my home because it's a long drive and it was raining. But this thing can go 21 miles. It's, they call it solving the last mile problem. And I wrote it from the parking lot till here. I put it in my car, and when I go back, I'll do it. By the way, you guys are welcome to take a ride if you want. But RB's story is somewhat like this. So they did a lot of the things, they did it in virtual, and that's why they can get to market so much faster. They do all kinds of things from simulation because, of course, one unique thing about this, and I think I was telling you, Jeremy, earlier, that this is not adjustable, the height. But I've tried maybe around 30, 40 people. Nobody has ever complained about the height. Like a small guy works fine. I don't know how they did it, but they must have tested things and all of those kinds of things. But they've been able to do that. And, so it's when you write it, very nice. This is I was in Pasadena, so I'm writing that. So we were going from places, from their factory to their shop, all of that. Just a couple of more examples, and then I know I'm probably running out of my time. So this is, I wanted to bring a little bit of the overseas China. So I was in Shenzhen earlier, and this is out of HAX Accelerator, which is one of the, we work with a lot of startup incubators, accelerators across the world. HAX is one of them, one of the biggest ones for hardware. And out of Shenzhen in China, there's some amazing companies startup doing all kinds of things. But I was very impressed with these guys because, again, gap to zero. Going from nothing to a product, a function product, getting a company like Michelin to buy into it in 90 days. Right? That's amazing if you think about it. And that was because they were smart, they used software, they use a universal, I think some of those universal arms already existing. So what they do is, essentially, they figured out that a lot of these buses in the night go to a depot and stop, and they have to make sure that the tires are okay, because next morning they have to go in there. So they have these humans who used to analyze the tires and so on. They figured out that that can be done by a robot, because they had the technology to analyze the tire, but they did not have all the movement and articulation and everything else. They put it on they had a motorized thing, put a universal arm on it, put their gadgetry, which does the tire thing, connected to an IoT something, so all the data is going somewhere. Michelin has bought into that, and Michelin, I think, has said that for all their buses, etc., they're going to use these guys. So a quick example of that. Here's an example of, the startup world is just exploding, and people are coming with this idea. This is just a small sample in food and robotics. I think there's a restaurant here in downtown where you can get your food bowl made. It's all robotic. Here are a few examples: robot cafe, wheat pulling robot, salad making. I met those guys actually. They had the machine in San Francisco, and then there's a food delivery robot. So all different kinds of things happening. Entrepreneurship is changing and creating it. So that's it. I just wanted to again say, so yes, we talk about Industry 4.0, but the renaissance to us is about when you bring human in the axis, lower the axis so everybody can participate. And it's not just about tech, it's art, it's design, it's business and technology. And if you bring all this together and lower the axis, then beautiful startups and a lot of new stuff comes out. Thank you.